Thank you, everyone, and good evening. So I'm Louise McLaren. I'm one of the founding members of MarketingKind, and I've organised tonight along with Paul and Anna, who set up MarketingKind. So very welcome to this exchange tonight, where we're going to be asking together, how can we move beyond the concept of sustainability? And to have that discussion, we're joined by a panel of inspiring eco-entrepreneurs, is the language that Anna came up with. If the panel will accept that label, and later they can tell me if they don't and how they prefer to think of themselves. So by way of a quick introduction to MarketingKind, for those who are less familiar, many of you may not be members, brackets, yet, just to tell you a bit about who we are. So we're a community of business leaders, marketers, and change makers, and we believe together that solutions that most of the world's problems lie in new forms of human collaboration and cooperation, and therefore can be deemed as marketing briefs in disguise. And we believe that as marketeers, we've got a set of skills that we can apply creatively and constructively to help address those big global challenges. And we're here today to talk about sustainability. And sustainability is a sort of fat, big word to many of us. We'll use it day in, day out in our daily lives, in our jobs. And often we'll use it because it's just such a term that's in our sort of common parlance, without really stopping to think about what's it supposed to mean, what does it mean, how is it interpreted, and what can it mean going forward, and where can it take us? And we're not going to see the language of sustainability go away. We're not here to say stop using that term. Of course, it has meaning still, and it's an important piece of language. We've got the UN Sustainable Development Goals after all, and many of us in our work will pay heed to those. But our premise today is that we need to think beyond sustainability, that conceptually it's not bold enough. And that if we're going to address the major challenges that the world faces, including climate emergency, we need language that takes us to ideas that inspire bolder visions and more radical change. And we believe that sustainability paradigms just aren't taking us far enough. In business, we need new models of thinking and new ways of being that are underpinned by innovative ways that brands can think about how they reduce their impact. And in essence, thinking about how we flip the story to one where brands have a detrimental impact through consumerism to even a net positive impact on people and planet. But how can we do that? In MarketingKind, we seem to manage, thanks to Anna and Paul in particular, to often have really eminent, amazing academics, authors come along and talk with us and really challenge our thinking intellectually. And we thought that today it'd be great to bring together great thinkers, but more from a real world point of view, from brands that are doing things differently. They've been set up, organizations have been set up to challenge something that's not working, and to give us a bit of a real world take on how those of us, whether we're agency side, in inverted commas, client side, or sitting somewhere else in the sort of broad marketing ecosystem, business world, can think about doing things differently. And I know that some of you might work in big corporates, some of you do work in big corporates, and it can sometimes be hard to look at a new brand, a challenger brand, a brand that's been set up to do something differently, and to think, well, how can I take those learnings and apply them to this big multinational that I work in, with all of its processes and constraints? But I do really think that there's going to be useful ideas for everyone today. So we're saying as well that there's going to be ample time for questions. There's a Q&A feature here, and some of you shared Q&A questions in advance. Thank you for that. I've done what I can to capture them, so we make sure we go back to them. And otherwise, please use the Q&A function for questions that will come back to you around 6 p.m. UK time. And if you put things in the chat, we might not be able to capture them so easily. And so, without much further ado, joining me today are Bella Collins, the head of marketing at Flexi-Hex, Kerry Bannigan, the executive director of the Fashion Impact Fund, Sarah Fulton Vachon, the founder of Citizens of Soil, and Edzard van der Wyck, co-founder and CEO of Sheep Included. I knew I'd get the Dutch pronunciation there really badly wrong. Sorry, Edzard. So I'm going to ask each of you now to give an introduction to yourselves and pronounce your names properly, and just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, your businesses, and then we'll navigate the discussion from there. So Edzard, you're top of my screen. Do you want to go first?
Hold on, just unmute myself. Hi, great to be here. Yeah, so my my background is I set up this business called Sheep Inc. And I suppose what we really try to do is to come in and challenge how a fashion brand can behave. Like, if you're creating a fashion brand of tomorrow, what does that look like? How do you bake sustainability and sustainable innovation into every single part of the business? And how do you have this kind of evolution of behavior change as a business? Again, if you were to start a business with a blank sheet of paper today. And so what we do at our core is we sell merino wool knitwear. But I suppose our real innovation comes in our supply chain approach, where we've come in and we've created a supply chain that starts with sourcing wool from regenerative farms in New Zealand. And through that process, we're able to naturally sequester more CO2 at our source material stage than traditionally, obviously, with wool being very problematic due to methane producing animals. And we then, through the rest of our supply chain, we manufacture using solar powered manufacturing. We don't use any chemicals. And through that process, we're able to create a supply chain basically that creates the products like the sweater I'm wearing that actually has a naturally carbon negative impact. So through the very creation of our sweater, we sequester more CO2 than gets created. And what we've also built into the business is we've also built a technology layer that sits on top of this supply chain. So it's a digital end-to-end supply chain. And through that, we're able to register basically every single event in a sweater's creation. And when you get it, it has this NFC tag that it sits on. And when you tap it with your phone, you get to see every single part of the journey, basically, of that sweater. And not only that, but we also connect you with a sheep from the same farm that your sweater's wool is from. And it's this idea, again, if you're thinking about how we can kind of evolve as a company around sustainability, is we don't only want to provide a kind of a product and a solution that is more sustainable, but we also want to bring in a behavior change piece. So through that kind of sense of connection that can be built with connecting you with a sheep and getting updates on it, it brings in this kind of story elements, and it brings in this kind of thought pattern that starts to emerge, where you start to think about the genesis and the creation of the things that you buy.
Brilliant, thank you. And I love that connection that you make between the customer and the sort of sheep of origin, if you will. And there's a sheep in New Zealand called Rudy, which my mum cheekily named after my niece. Brilliant, thank you very much, Edzard. Bella, should we go to you next?
Yeah, hi, so I'm Bella. I joined a company called Flexi-Hex about 18 months ago. Flexi-Hex are a paper packaging company predominantly, trying to disrupt the packaging space, which is, it's a huge one. It's a multi-billion-dollar sort of industry, and Flexi-Hex is a small Cornish business just trying to make an impact and make it a bit better. Originally, the concept was to strip plastic from the packaging industry, but actually now they're looking at it from a design point of view and actually designing new solutions rather than focusing on the problem. And there's a lot of sort of alternatives out there now that are more sustainable. Cardboard packaging isn't something that's new, but actually how can we design it better so that we're using less material, that we're causing less things to break in transit, which is seriously important as e-commerce is growing at the rate it's growing. How can we make sure that we are actually protecting products in transit well? But it's also putting the consumer first, so actually making part of that unboxing experience one that elevates a brand. I think packaging is always put last, but actually packaging is a shop window these days. So how can we make that something memorable that is making a good impact on the world? I think that where we need to go next, we're still a small brand, we're only about 3 years old, is this challenge of we have a sustainable product. How can we be more sustainable as a business? And what can we be doing to make a better impact on the planet? And I think this conversation is really interesting, one of the sort of like not resting on your laurels and not saying, hey, we've got a great product. What can we be doing even more to keep making better decisions? And I think that's the point in our journey that we're in.
And thank you for that, Bella. I really appreciate the honesty up front. And I think it's worth saying that I didn't ask all of you here thinking that you are all necessarily sort of paragons of virtue in the business world. And none of you asked to attend a discussion on going beyond sustainability thinking that you are all sort of perfect. And I think we need an important part of learning and developing together is about being honest about where and how can we do things differently. And so thank you for that. I appreciate that. Kerry, should we go to you next?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm Kerry Bannigan. I'm the Executive Director of the Fashion Impact Fund. My background and work is focused on leading private-public partnerships around fashion and media to drive good. I lead several key programs with the United Nations that we can get into later in the discussion. And it's all around really accelerating transformative action for people and planet, and particularly how we can use the Sustainable Development Goals as a guiding framework. Recently, we launched a charitable fund, which I mentioned a moment ago, called the Fashion Impact Fund. That was really to house all the variety of our programs that are going on into one place. And very specifically right now, where we can support women entrepreneurs that are leading initiatives to accelerate the fashion industry's transition to an equitable and inclusive sector. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much, Kerry. It's interesting to have you joining us from a slightly different perspective in terms of the kind of work you do, all very complementary, and super excited to hear more about how you work and how you drive that impact in the ways that you collaborate with businesses and support businesses. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Sarah.
Oh, well, I would say least, because actually we are the smallest and the newest of the crew. So let me take my place in line. I'm super humbled and excited just to chat to all of y'all and hear your stories. And I know, Bella, we use Flexi-Hex from the beginning, so I'm already like a huge fan of your product, and we get lots of compliments on it. So yeah, I am the founder of Citizens of Soil. Again, we're just a year old, but the company, the ambition is to make pantry staples that are making a statement. But we launched initially, and still just our flagship product is an extra virgin olive oil that we source from Crete. While we saw market opportunity, which is why we kind of enhanced the business, but actually at the start, this was just about, we have an extended farm family in Crete, and they made this incredible product, and they weren't getting paid fairly for it in the market rates, how olive oil is traded like a commodity. They were making it to a really high standard, even a lower yield, but harvesting early. And we were like, you should be rewarded for this. This is ridiculous. Why are you paying what people are paying for like 3-year-old oil that's going to the supermarkets? And so it started with that, just wanting to get our friends, our family, a better rate for their olive oil, and thinking, well, I've worked in food and drink and marketing, I can do this. But then spending, a year plus actually before we launched the business learning about olive oil, we saw so many issues inside the supply chain with fraud and obviously labor issues, environmental issues. And so it kind of became something that, because at the time I was working in supply chain transparency, I thought people should know about this. And olive oil is just a category, unlike coffee and craft spirits and even chocolate, which have had this whole movement around labor and around some of their environmental impact. You haven't seen that in olive oil. And this is an ancient superfood that we've used to really create the Western Empire. And yet we don't know anything about it. We don't even know what extra virgin means. So that's kind of the start of the business. So because of that, we have a completely transparent supply chain. We use provenance.org to show our supply chain, but also anything that we're claiming. So our lab report is on there, and it's backed. We use like a third-party proof with blockchain to connect that data, like lab data, to show to consumers, as well as our charity donations. We're 1% for the Planet business, and we've chosen a soil regeneration charity as what we're giving to Kiss the Ground. And so, yeah, it's really just about, and I was really agree with what Bella was saying at the start of a business. You're not perfect. You're far from it. And you're trying every, even just this new year, making new steps to be better. So it's great to learn from others and see what they've been doing to continue to progress.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It's really interesting to hear that your business started from that more human angle initially than a planetary angle, which is kind of realizing that in the supply chain, the people that you met weren't getting their kind of fair wages and opportunity from creating this amazing product. Super interesting, and good to hear you talk about the supply chain, which we'll come back to. So it feels like it's got some connections to what Edzard was saying, and actually the way you talked about how you spotted that opportunity to do something differently in your category made me think about, wanted to come back to you, Edzard, to hear more about how you identified an opportunity to create Sheep Ink. Where did the idea come from to do something differently in the fashion world? What was your starting point?
So I'd actually set up another e-commerce business a few years ago called High Studios, which was a women's underwear brand. And I suppose what happened as I was growing that business is that I started to get firsthand a view in of how bad fashion was behaving. And what really shocked me at the time was how little it was being talked about. You know, you used to go to the pub and go and say, God, did you know? And then kind of reel off the facts about how bad fashion was behaving versus the planet. And I always got these slightly kind of blank looks back, thinking, really, fashion? Is that big a problem? And that really kind of spurred me into action, because I thought, this is a humongous problem. And listen, depending on what stat you pick, it's either the third, the fifth, the fourth most polluting industry on the planet, but it's up there. And again, up until actually a couple of years ago, it really wasn't talked about in that way. So that propelled me into action. At the same time, I also had a son at the time, and as these things happen, you tend to kind of start to think a bit more generationally. What am I leaving behind, and what kind of impact do I want the business that I run and the company that I have to have? And so that's what, again, propelled me into action. And so I left Heist at that point. And my starting point was really like, how can you create, first of all, how can you create an interesting business, but at the same time, also, how can you bring this behavior change piece into fashion? How can you actually get consumers to start thinking and start caring about where stuff comes from? Because the reality is, unfortunately, there's just not that much awareness. So that was really the starting point. And I actually worked with a think tank in Copenhagen called the CIID, the Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design. And we did a lot of market research around, why do people not care? Like, why aren't people buying more sustainably? And the reality is, what it came down to is, like, fashion has been such an opaque industry for so long, and people are just conditioned not to ask questions, right? That's kind of like as simple as that. Therefore, fashion can kind of get away with behaving badly because people aren't really interrogating it, because they're not expecting, even if they ask the questions, they're not actually expecting to get any answers. So I think that was once again our starting point. And obviously supply chain visibility has been talked about here. That was our starting point. So we need to bring visibility to our process. We need to make sure that whatever business we end up creating has this very transparent supply chain, so that people can get a real look in and see how a garment is manufactured, what impact has it had, who's involved in making it, who are suppliers, what carbon footprint does it have every single step of the way. But we still wanted to also address, again, this kind of behavior change piece, right? That was the kind of like the emotional part of it. Like, how do you actually get people to care? Because I think our position was a bit that, transparency is kind of one part of the problem, but it's quite a dry subject, just kind of offering transparency to people is like, it's not a hugely kind of engaging topic. So we really wanted people to start looking at that and going, okay, how do you get them interested in supply chain? How do you get them interested in what is fundamentally the story of your garment's creation? And so those were all the kind of ideas that were kind of swirling around. And the reality is, just from a product point of view, to kind of circle back to why we ended up selling knitwear, is that my previous business had sold women's underwear, and we were very proud of what we'd created, because we'd come up with a very disruptive brand proposition that went very much against the kind of traditional women's underwear aesthetic that was unfortunately very kind of women as objects, sex kind of focus, and we put a more intelligent proposition there. But with this, I really wanted to have a product that I understood and that I could kind of wear myself and kind of really understand. And so knitwear quickly became the product that I became, the kind of the product category that I became really interested in. If you talk about it from a business opportunity, the knitwear is it's a huge space. There's a lot of kind of product categories that sit within it. And so, as you probably know, being a D2C brand in a kind of more modern environment, it's good to be kind of known to be a specialist, so that you can kind of come in and you can be the leader in a particular category. And knitwear was kind of really interesting for us, because it was kind of like it was a big enough category to kind of to operate in, and there was enough kind of scope for growth, but still we were able to be specialized in it. And so through that process, we identified knitwear, and then obviously we built this kind of, sorry, I don't know if you can hear my son screaming in the background.
You're probably gonna have the same here at some point soon.
Yeah, exactly. I'll mute myself as soon as I'm up. So he's got chicken pox. That's why some extra screams are happening. So we were able to. Sorry, slightly lost my train of thought. But so creating kind of knitwear as a category became really interesting for us. And then this supply chain piece, of course, became the question, like, how can we create a supply chain? How do we now make sure that we create this product in the best way possible? And what we did compared to, I suppose, traditional fashion brands is we didn't look traditional fashion brands are top down in the way they look at their manufacturing and their supply chain. They approach a supplier and they say, hey, we want to create a garment. And then as it goes back through the supply chain, the visibility becomes less and less. So down to the raw material stage where 90% of brands don't even know where their raw materials come from. And so we wanted to kind of upend that process, and we started from the other side. So we said, okay, we want to control the entire supply chain. We want to make sure that we can make the right decision at every stage of manufacturing. And that, as I mentioned in my introduction, it was like, the raw material became for us the biggest focal point, because also in knitwear, especially if you create an animal-based product, right? It's a wool product. Livestock is a huge part of the problem. So actually in a wool supply chain, in a knitwear supply chain, the raw material stage is where the kind of like the biggest CO2 impact is. So that's where we also knew we had to really focus our efforts. So through that, we started working with these farms in New Zealand that were at the forefront of the regenerative farming movement, and went in there and started working with basically guys who were kind of best in class when it came to land management, and the way that they managed their land meant that they could naturally sequester more CO2 than all the sheep and all the farm operations would admit. And as I mentioned, we just kind of pulled that all the way through the rest of the supply chain. And then it circled back to this piece of, we then had the supply chain, we then built the technology layer that allowed us to bring visibility to the customer. But then, of course, there was this emotional piece that became really important. How do you get customers to care? And that's where we said, let's have them adopt a sheep.
There's lots to think about and different directions you can go in from there. And I'm really triggered by how you talked about the opacity of the fashion sector and how that's a barrier to people engaging in sustainability, because they just think they're not going to get any clarity and transparency. And the idea of making them interested in your supply chain, I think, is an unusual way of thinking. How do you bring the supply chain to life in a way that's engaging, and that sort of helps people to want to do things differently and make a difference? So those are two, for me, interesting angles on.
And it also helps, if you look at it from a business point of view, it's also the bit that will drive word of mouth. It's like if you can engage with an interesting story, and then you can tell someone else about an interesting story, and it's good, in that sense, it's good for your business, right? So people are talking about the brand in an interesting way. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And let's stay in the fashion thread for a minute. And Kerry, tell us a bit about how you identified the opportunity to support women entrepreneurs in the fashion world to work in a way that's more regenerative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just to echo what's being said here is I don't think a lot of people in the day-to-day understand how damaging the fashion industry is. And as Edzard was saying, you start getting into that and realizing it's pretty shocking, and you end up down a rabbit hole that you can't leave. And instead you want to find the solutions or the systems that can help that. And, for those that are not aware, today's fashion industry is responsible for vast negative social and environmental impacts. And that will go anything from water pollution, exploited labor, the poverty, the gender inequality, and so on. And, with my work, it has always been open to the fashion and media worlds of who is driving what. And it was only recently we decided to narrow in with one of our projects, really looking at women social entrepreneurs. And, we're all very aware of what has gone on globally, connecting us at this unprecedented time with the pandemic. And we've really seen how women entrepreneurs have been nurturing their community, stepping up for what is going on. And we wanted to ensure that we could provide more of what was needed, mobilizing finance, resources, and so forth for women that were driving change in the fashion space. And when you look at the fashion industry, I'm just going to say a couple of statistics for those that are not familiar of what can go on in this space. You're looking at a $2.4 trillion space that employs more than 300 million people along the value chain. And with that, when you look at certain reports that have shared, Fashion Revolution, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation have shared around 75 million garment workers are in this space, and 80% of those workers are women. And so with that, we wanted to really be able to support women entrepreneurs that are advocating for a new paradigm in the fashion sector, one that's fair and resilient, And often these agents of change, they are representing vulnerable and marginalized populations that are actually harmed by the unsustainable practices of the fashion industry. Fashion is damaging social and environmental, but also for many, economically too. It is not uplifting. And so it's amazing to see the things that are now coming out, and the solutions exist. And even to, as Edzard is saying, and Bella and Sarah here in your own tracks of work, it is about looking not only what's the product, but then how do you implement the systems and strategies in your own business? And we need to learn cross-sector. Fashion can learn from many other sectors how to get better. It can lean on technologies that exist that are out there and so forth. And I think we're now starting to see, what can we do here to do better? With this being focused on marketeers for this conversation, how do we take the power of the narrative and doing it correctly? How can we move away from what is dubbed as the greenwashing, or in the UN realm with the SDGs, rainbow washing? You can't just slap these icons on things and say, this is what we're doing. There's a depth that needs to come, and fact and truth to the storytelling. And I love actually how Edzard is saying, like, adopt a sheep, come on the journey with us, learn. Because once you can grasp people in with one part that intrigues them, then you can start to educate them. And there's a lot to be learned. And also, to echo something that was said here, we are conditioned to not to ask questions about fashion, and the media and advertising sectors have done an incredible job of pushing the throwaway fashion society and other things on us, that now it's time to hold responsibility to those sectors and see what can we do to change the narrative, and to really champion the voices and the solution leaders that are rewriting the narrative.
Brilliant, thank you. And I love that kind of angle on intrigue into education. Thank you very much, Kerry. And so, we're here today to talk about sustainability not being enough, not taking us far enough conceptually. And I presume you don't strongly disagree with that notion, otherwise you wouldn't be here, all of you. But really interested to hear kind of what you think about this idea that sustainability doesn't go far enough anymore. Bella, what do you think? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I was reading into this yesterday a lot more, because it's very easy to get stuck in your day-to-day and say, okay, we're doing a good thing, we're making less of an impact on the planet. And especially as a small business, we're only a team of 13. You just sort of say, we've got a sustainable product, and we just need to be a profitable company, make this work and make as much of an impact as possible. But when you stop and think for a second, it's not about making less of an impact. It's about how can we make a more positive impact going forward. And that was the biggest learning I took out from just sitting down and thinking about it a bit yesterday, is making less of an impact is great. And I think we need to congratulate people that are making an effort. We're all trying to do good. Let's award the people that are doing good, but then also keep challenging them, saying, okay, you're doing good. What's the next step? How can we actually make that less of an impact into no impact? And then the next step, actually, what's a positive impact that's going to protect the planet that we live on for the next generations to come? And at Flexi-Hex, we're not there yet. We are probably a couple of years away from that, but to keep stopping every now and then and saying, what is our next step? How can we make better decisions on a daily basis? And to what Kerry said earlier, I think was like, we're not in this alone. So how can we learn from other industries? What can we share with other industries? What can we learn from our customers? There's this constant curiosity and evolving of the business and not being set in our ways. And I think the packaging industry, for one, has been set in its ways for years. Amazon will send you massive boxes with wasted airspace and excess, paper and cardboard, because it's just the done thing and nobody questions it. Again, it comes back to that, nobody's questioning it. But the founders of Flexi-Hex, Sam and Will, got frustrated. They questioned it. They've designed something better. And I think it's that being open to change, pushing yourself, and like I said, changing that, making less of an impact into making a positive impact.
I think you're all, as we've touched on, you're all relatively young organizations. We're not here saying that you're all doing things as perfectly as you'd like to, but learning, evolving. And I'm just curious about this kind of almost growth mindset that you described, Bella, and I sense it's probably something that all of you share here, this idea of questioning, challenging yourselves, thinking differently, looking at how you can push further. And I'm just wondering about whether you have any of the rest of the panel, any sort of observations on how you do that, how you make sure that you keep challenging yourselves, you keep evolving, you keep moving forward. What about you, Sarah? I know you said you're sort of a very young business. You've planned a lot of what's important to you in from the outset, but it sounds like you're still on an evolutionary journey. Do you want to tell us a bit about how you're kind of thinking about how you move forward and what you might want to do differently going forward?
Yeah, well, I have the blessing and the curse of coming from a great social enterprise that was working in supply chains to make them better. So I knew all the stuff I should be doing. And it's an overwhelming amount. And I feel for these big businesses, especially well-established ones that have everything already in play with their supply chains, and they're trying to turn this ship, because you can just think that it becomes exhausting to think of all the things you can do. I think in the case of, and because I knew that from consulting these businesses and being like, oh man, you have so much to clean up. Like, I don't know. I think that so we've named our company Citizens of Soil. So soil is a huge focus for us. It plays to terroir in the phrase of like the flavor, but it also is kind of what we built everything off of. And in the case of soil, going back to when we were talking about sustainability, is it enough, and how businesses need to go beyond that, because we're new. So we're not just trying to sustain, we're trying to do better. And that's because when you look at something like soil, and I'll get to why it plays heavily into olive groves, but soil, already a third of the world's soil is degraded, and we're losing 30 pitches, football pitches, every minute is being lost. And it's absolutely insane, because soil is not something that's renewable. It's not a renewable resource in the sense that it takes more than a human life to actually build that back. So we're kind of in a pickle when it comes to what we've done to our soil on a global level. And there's a lot of great organizations that are tackling this and trying to figure it out. Really, it's quite a simple, like, everyone just needs to cover the soil. But when we look at the olive groves in particular, for the past couple decades, when modern agriculture has destroyed what's been going on in our food systems, they have told these farmers to completely strip out all vegetation around olive groves. And so you see this like very barren, dry, arid, exposed soil. And that is, well, soil that then becomes dirt because it dies. So that is for two reasons. One, it's because they're often grown in really dry places, which means that any water that comes in, they thought that these plants would be competing with the trees. So don't let anything compete with the trees. Let the trees take all the soil or all the water. And two, because then you get to be, you can claim to be organic, because you don't have any pests, because nothing is living in your groves. That we now know is not the way. Having soil cover, having ground cover actually does lock in moisture and actually helps those plants. And having biodiversity at play helps tackle a lot of the issues. You know, olive fly, like our pest, can be tackled by bees. And so it's like we can bring regenerate this land and bring a healthy ecosystem back. So when I look at our groves and are starting our business, we only stopped tilling, or this family, you know, only stopped tilling 3 years ago to switch over to these better farms. So those groves are not where I want them yet. They are. We have ground cover, and we have wild herbs growing. We have clovers and, you know, some beautiful, just wild food plants really growing about, but it's not where I want it yet. And so I think as a business, you're looking at those sort of things. Yes, there's packaging. Thank God I have Flexi. There's all sorts of other things I want to tackle. My carbon offset is on my list as well. But really, every day, that's what I'm focused on. What can we do with the land? What can we, and I have to just narrow in on the soil because of what it's going to give from a nutrition standpoint and what it's going to do to save for future generations of farming in our land.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, that you have to start by focusing and prioritizing somewhere. And so just going back to this theme of that kind of what's enough, how do you judge what's enough? I'm interested in your take on that, Edzard, coming from where you're coming from, because you've really baked in quite, it seems to me, rigorous thinking on the end-to-end of your supply chain from the get-go. Are you where you want to be, or is there more that you think that you could do, would want to do?
Yeah, Liz, I mean, it's never enough, right? I mean, as long as we're standing at this precipice, it's never going to be enough for every single company out there. So I think the simple answer is no. We're never happy, right? And I don't think we ever will be. You know, and I think that should be part of the mindset. It's like, where can we improve? I think the most important piece, though, which not a lot of fashion brands do, is really identify, though, where to focus your initial efforts. I think that's really important. There's obviously a lot of headline things that you can do, for instance, take kind of plastic out of your supply chain and pieces like that are incredibly important. But I think every brand does need to look at their their supply chain and their impact, and run ideally a third-party audit and start to figure out, okay, where am I having the most significant amount of impact, and start your kind of like your way down like that, right? And so that's where we started, right? We knew that kind of wool and merino wool was a very problematic material, but if you get it in the right way, it can be a very positive material because it's a natural material. It's 100% biodegradable. It doesn't have any synthetic, non-biodegradability problems that so many, the vast majority of fashion uses. So that's really where we started. But from an impact point of view, we're always looking to improve. We currently get all our wool from New Zealand. There's obviously transport involved for getting it from New Zealand into where we manufacture in Portugal. We spin everything in Italy and we manufacture in Portugal. Now, interestingly enough, transport, if you look at it on a kind of like on an absolute carbon footprint point of view, is definitely not the biggest problem in a supply chain like ours, but it is an area that we still want to improve. We send everything by ship, but of course they're big ships, often run by diesel, and so that's a bit an area, for instance, where we're really looking like how can we optimize again our supply chain there. There is unfortunately it is an innovation. It's almost like an innovation problem. We're waiting for shipping industry to kind of catch up and start to use different type of fuels. We've looked into sailing ships, but obviously going from New Zealand it's a complicated one to kind of fix. But yeah, I mean, it really is a case of looking at every aspect of the business, and it's just constantly chipping away at it. And I'd say what's interesting is my co-founder comes from a very analytical background and 100% not fashion. And what was interesting for having him as my co-founder and very much kind of like my counterparty to all the thinking in the business is that because he wasn't from fashion, he came in and he challenged absolutely everything, because he went, why is it done like that? And it comes back to the packaging conversation that you were saying, is he just came in and went, well, why is it like that? And often that's all it takes, is someone to go, to kind of interrogate it, because a lot of people will just be stuck in their ways and they'll be like, well, that's how it's been done for ages, and that's why we're going to continue to do it that way. So occasionally you just need that fresh viewpoint to come in and challenge things. So I'd say that's an important mindset that we have in the company, and we have that throughout. And then on top of that, it is analysis, and making sure that you constantly are aware of all your pockets of impact. By the way, which again circles back to this piece of visibility in your supply chain. That does mean you need total visibility of your supply chain to know where to fix things.
Yeah. And I love this idea of having someone come in and have a different point of view, that question of why is it done like this, which you alluded to, Bella, earlier on. And you've described that as being a starting point of your businesses, but actually that's a translatable thing into big corporates. There are ways that they can push themselves out of their norms and their embedded ways of thinking to sort of question the stuff that is so established that you just don't think about it, or you think it's something you just can't change because it's so opaque, because it's so complicated. So I think, again, so across all of this, ideas pop up that can be taken into different contexts, different kinds of roles and businesses, and constantly analysing, constantly wanting to move forward and never being satisfied feels like a sort of a red thread here. And I'm sort of across all this as well, we're thinking about how we can bring customers along the journey with us, because obviously we need to if we're going to exist as businesses and develop and grow. And there've been some interesting discussion points on that so far. And one thing that intrigues me is a connection to sense of place that a number of you have. But all of you have in different ways. So you've got Greece, you've got Cornwall, for example, you've got my niece Rudy sheep in New Zealand. And I'm really interested in kind of how a sense of place might play into your sense of identity as brands and how you bring that to life and engage people in that. Because I think often sustainability can feel quite divorced from the planet and the real planetary impact. So I'm just really interested to hear more about what your provenance, what your roots, and what that sense of place means to all of you as businesses. Maybe Bella, you can tell us a bit about that from the Cornish perspective.
Yeah, definitely. So our business was started in a coastal town in Cornwall by two surfers. They were designers previously, but they were fed up with the surfboards arriving wrapped in bubble wrap and seeing this waste in the environment that was their playground essentially, you know. And so they designed this material, this sort of Flexi-Hex sleeve for surfing, and realized that actually this can be applied to every industry. But when it comes to sort of telling our story, it's our why. And I think that consumers want more out of a brand these days. They don't just want a product, they want to buy into a company, they want to be part of that community, they like to be part of those conversations, to follow them online. And I think that our why, like why we make the decisions that we make, why we make the product that we do, is because we want to protect the marine environment that is our playground. And that lives through the team that we have, the values that we live on a day-to-day basis. You know, we make sure that we finish work at 5 so we can go out and we can enjoy the seaside air, because that is a value that we hold really highly. And so it's really feeding that through into every part of the business. Why do we exist? What are we trying to do? What impact are we trying to make? And really making sure that we then share that with the people that want to be on that journey with us. I think, like, from a personal point of view, I've gone across a couple of oceans. I've seen the impact that plastic and waste it has out there. I mean, my last journey across the Pacific, I actually saw more waste than I saw sea life. And so for me, that's a real personal connection to making sure that I get out of bed every day and I'm making an impact and making a difference.
Thank you. God, what a horrifying story about the amount of plastic waste there is in the ocean, which, unless you do something like you've done, you might know conceptually, but just don't quite grasp.
It was mad. You know, I was so looking forward to seeing all this wildlife, and it just didn't see any of it. But we did see a lot of waste bobbing along the ocean going past us, and it really, really brought to life what is happening out there.
Thank you. And tell us a bit about, Sarah, tell us just a bit more about that sense of place and what that means for your brand. It's clearly sort of central to your DNA.
Yeah, I think certainly releasing something like an olive oil as our first product. Now we're looking at something that is a single ingredient, fresh juice. And in our case, it's a single estate. So it's coming from one particular place in one particular village. And olive oil, like wine, and actually like any single ingredient, you even see it in skincare and probably in fashion, certain cottons, it's like they reflect the places they come from. And so that's what we wanted our food, to be like. So I think in that case, we're quite connected to this particular product and showing those farmers and bringing light to the supply chain. It really, and how you tell that, I know we're saying there's an issue with how you engage people on your supply chain, but the adopt a sheep or, the cook along with the farmer, these sort of activities can really let you meet your maker of the products and feel like there's like a stake, some sort of relationship at play. And yeah, I mean, certainly even just going beyond that, we haven't made our brand just to be Greek at all, because the plan is to actually work with a lot of single estate small farmers across the Mediterranean. Well, and actually I'm talking to some in other places as well. But I think you can still be kind of connected by this soil that, is really everywhere you are, it's there, but it's a common bond between all of us. And so it's something that grounds us. And I think if we can keep kind of zooming out and then zooming back into these areas of soil, that would be, kind of the future that we'd like to take the brand.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I'm interested to come back to this language of sustainability, which is central to what we're talking about today, and the premise that sustainability isn't enough. We've sort of circled around that, but I'm just really curious to hear your takes on whether the idea of sustainability does take us far enough, whether it is a term that we can continue to sort of hold as central to what we do, or whether we need to start thinking about and pushing the use of different sort of subsets of that idea, or new terminology that encourages us to go further. Kerry, let's hear from you, because I think you talk about regenerative businesses, and maybe that's not the kind of the term that you might want to highlight here, but I'm just curious to hear a bit about your take on this question of whether sustainability is enough and whether we need to think beyond that and how we do that then.
It's definitely become a very busy, big word, and still kept extremely vague as we all move along. What does the definition of that mean? And I think, one positive thing that we are seeing is it's being used more often, which means more people are starting to think about. I don't think it signals more people are addressing things regarding sustainability, but it definitely signals that. And I think, again, as marketeers on this call, we've got to be extremely careful of how this term is used. It can't be slapped on absolutely everything. It doesn't even make sense. There's different finer definitions that we can look to say. And you talk about how people now use this word regenerative a lot more. And, to me, when we're looking at sustainability efforts in general, we've got to look at people and planet and profit, of course. This is a business-led conversation, but we have to keep looking at, I think when we use terms sustainability, it used to be eco, then it was ethical. We've been on a big journey of this for many, many years, but we have to keep bringing it back to people and planet. And how do you then define that in your business of what you're trying to achieve? And I think specifically when we view the fashion and lifestyle sectors, people able to disguise and disconnect from the humanity element by saying supply chain. It's a human value chain. Business is built on humans. There is no business without the people that you work with. Even if you are, people say when they're starting out, I'm a one-person team. No, you're not. Who are your vendors? Who are you working with? Where are you getting your materials from? Or who is helping you? And what is going on? And correct, it is also built on sheep. I've just seen that thrown into. And it's people and planet. It comes back to my point of it's all interconnected. And so on one hand, I do love, because I felt quite isolated for a while when you would be that person at the table talking about sustainability and they're like, oh my God, she's going to be banging on about this again. We're trying to just have dinner. But now it's becoming more of a mass conversation. It now holds us all accountable, no matter the size of our business, no matter the role that we're doing. How do we convey this? How do we communicate this? And sustainability has to stop being the buzz term. It's okay to say we have sustainable plans, but this is how we define it. And this is what it means to our business. And this is how we drive these solutions. I always talk about solutions, systems, and strategies. And it's like, okay, one main part of the strategy needs to be in businesses is those that are dubbed into the sustainability team have to be able to talk to everybody else in the team, from marketing to comms to the supply chain and so forth. And, I feel like this was two parts that you threw in there. Like, is sustainability enough? No, it's not. And I'm a big one to push on that we need policy. We need legislation. When you see businesses that are doing good and purpose-led businesses, take my three fellow panelists here, they're doing it off their own back. There's no tax incentives, there's no support, there's no education hubs, there's no help. There are tools, don't get me wrong, that are out there, but there is no universal support to say this is the right way to go. And businesses should not be carrying all this responsibility themselves, just like it's not the consumer's job to pick up the crap of the lifestyle sector. It is not the way it should be done. The reality is, you said to us, you called us eco-entrepreneurs. Wouldn't it be fabulous that we just get to the point in society and business that to be an entrepreneur is just to build a purposeful business, that we don't need to be silo labeled? And, we're all just navigating what this looks like and what this means. But I will say, being able to say the word sustainability, just like why I love the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, is a roadmap. It's a blueprint and it's a language to connect us. It's not the only answer. I'm not naive to things need to be better with it. But it is a blueprint. It provides a very visual path for certain sectors to be able to connect on. And for all of us, it is a language that can be universal. And I feel it now when we say sustainable, it peels a tiny bit off of the can of what we can do, but it's definitely not enough as a word or even as a plan of what we're going to do.
Oh, it's very eloquently put. Thank you so much. And I'm just interested to hear the language that you use to answer this question, Edzard. I think on packaging that you have for your sweaters and your beanies and so on, you say something very similar, that sustainability is no longer enough. I may be paraphrasing, but you've created a business. So you've created this business with that concept in mind. I'm just really curious to hear your view on, why you say that. It might sound like an obvious question, but just tell us why.
because for me it has the word sustain in it, which is kind of like it's just sustaining the status quo, and I think that's the real problem there. It has this kind of this idea of like neutralizing also, I think, is problematic. Like, it is not neutralizing impacts. Bella was saying as well, it's actually like how do you improve your, like, how do you actually improve the planet, right? How do you actually not just exist and don't register, but how do you actually make sure that you leave some type of positive impact behind? So yeah, that's our idea behind saying it. It's like sustainability is no longer good enough. It's actually now we need to move into a mode of fixing things, you know, and actually being a business that does its part to fix things. Sorry. I think that's the mindset shift that needs to happen, because otherwise, once again, we're in real trouble. And I think, unfortunately, some of the heavy lifting has to be done by, you know, if you look at the fashion industry in particular, even if 50% in the best case scenario starts behaving in the right way, there's still going to be 50% of the industry that's not going to be doing things right. So if you have 50% of the industry that is simply neutralizing their impact, that's still a net very negative impact. So yeah, we need as businesses again to be kind of moving towards a model where we aim to really fix things. So we also invest, as an example, we invest 3% of our revenue back into the farms on our supply chain, and also into biodiversity projects. So we again constantly look at kind of like improving, and also having more than just, even though we have naturally carbon negative impacts as a supply chain, we also do extra investment to make sure we have even more positive impact.
Brilliant. And just briefly on that, how do you figure out what kind of decisions to make in that respect? Because Kerry just touched on, I think you mentioned it earlier, actually, Kerry, sorry, that there's a lack of useful resources on what a business should look like today that goes beyond sustainability. And the legislation, the regulation isn't necessarily there either. The incentives aren't there. How do you decide what is good enough? How do you decide how far to push things and what to invest in and what to do? Where do you draw your reference points for the investments that you make, the things that you do?
I've got a sort of a thought on that. Actually, today we were doing a strategy day at Flexi-Hex, and we were doing sort of an accountability sort of table of where the accountability lies, and where does the accountability lie within our business for our sustainability, and where do we start when we've got so much to tackle and so much to do? And I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and they said, well, the first thing to do is map out your biggest stakeholders. Where are you making the biggest impact, and where are your stakeholders? Sort of what do they care the most about, and start from there. And there's also realizing that sustainability is a huge topic, so it's multifaceted. There are lots of different parts that feed into all different parts of the business. So go find the experts within sustainability for that topic that is going to make a big impact on your business. So whether that is in the fashion industry, a fabric, and you're going to find somebody that has a real niche and expertise in finding the most sustainable fabrics or innovating new fabrics. But from our perspective, that might be actually somebody who's really focused on sustainability within our supply chain, because that's probably our weakest spot. But sitting down first as a business, no matter what size you are, and saying, where can we make the biggest impact and where do we need the expertise, and getting it in. Because I think a lot of businesses, they just sort of say, you're in charge of sustainability now, and expect you to suddenly be an expert. And that's not the case, but there are experts out there to help you, to go find it. It's a bit like asking a marketer to do sales or an accountant to be a builder. Like, we can't be experts at everything, so go find the experts that you need.
No, I think that's a really important point about sort of having humility and bringing in that expertise. And it goes back to the point about prioritizing where you can have the biggest impact quickly enough that, and in that mapping your stakeholders, mapping where you can have the impact, you can start to really focus on where you start and how you map out your way forward. And sort of talking about sort of mapping things out, we often sort of think about bringing customers on a journey with us. And there have been a few different nuggets of ideas around that as we've been talking today, and I'm really curious to hear all your thoughts about how you craft brands and how you craft brand communications to accelerate behavior change. Because I think, Edzard, in your opening comments, you're spot on that the fashion industry and many others have bamboozled people for so many years by making it the norm that it's so opaque. Just really, you don't expect transparency. You don't expect to trust a lot of brands. And so often, then it's too hard to know how to make a confident decision. So people will quite often just sort of, even if they really care about climate change, revert to their normal kind of choices, the normal brands, because how to know what to buy otherwise, how to know what to trust. So I'm just really interested to hear more from all of you, and maybe we can start with you, Sarah. But how do you shape a brand that's compelling, that's credible, that engages people and really sort of helps facilitate that behavior change? And I'm sure you'll all have different takes on that. But maybe we start with you, Sarah. How do you bring people along the journey through your brand and through the way it communicates?
Well, I'll tell you more in the future whenever we'll see how it shapes out after 1 year of business. And only actually a couple of months of really head down doing it properly full time, even though we've been selling for a year. I think it starts at the very fundamentals of making, I think Kerry mentioned it earlier, like your triple bottom line, essentially, whenever you're making that business plan or even revisiting your strategy. Like I'm just updating our whole strategy and business plan again, because these things evolve every year. But that triple bottom line of people, planets, and profit, and setting like really your key objectives and your results under each one of those pillars is really important, because then you hold yourself to that as a business throughout, and you make decisions. And sometimes there are difficult decisions that you have to make, and things are going to cost way more, but you are making a decision because that honors your commitment to whatever goal you have under the people column or the planet column. So I think that is fundamentally, and to get your marketing and everyone involved in understanding why you're making those decisions, because this is baked into how we operate as a business. I also think one thing we used to consult a lot of the big brands is you need to have, if you have a bigger team, if you're not just a small company, but you need to have supply chain, marketing, and sustainability really sit down together and craft these stories, but craft them rooted in truth. So one thing that drives me crazy as a marketer, and whenever I came from the agency side, is we as creatives really just get creative and run wild with a story. We hear a hint of something, I see it in the olive oil industry all the time with somebody's grandfather, and they took this story and they run with it, and it's the whole campaign and it's the whole brand. And yet what's actually happening or been happening for 50 years is not connected to that story at all. Not that I'm, shitting on heritage, like that's an important thing, but for people to kind of, we would see all the time, companies be like, oh, we're going to invest, we're going to do this NGO, and it had nothing to do with anything related to their brand. And that's actually just a disconnect. It's great that you're giving to an NGO. It has nothing to do with your brand story, and the two aren't working together. So I think that is really important. You need what's actually happening, who's setting the goals to prevent the marketer from greenwashing, and you need the creative there to actually see the stories, because supply chain doesn't realize, oh, you're sourcing this really interesting ingredient from this place, and I can actually see the location. Let's talk about this. Yeah. So to me, the creativity comes in truth and should always be rooted in what's actually happening and the proof behind what's going on in your business.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And there's so much purpose washing going on right now, isn't there?
Yeah.
That's brilliant. The kind of the bringing together the supply chain, the marketing, the sustainability, and crafting something that's really properly rooted in truth.
You don't have to make up the story. Like so many marketers are sitting there scrambling every year to come up with your marketing plan for the year, and I'm like, it's here. Just get creative with the facts instead of having to invent the facts.
Yeah. And so I think, Bella, from a more of a business to business point of view, I'm really interested in how you engage your customers in your story and how you make them care and want to get on your journey. Is there anything that differs from a more of a kind of direct to consumer sort of brand?
I think Flexi-Hex are actually in a unique position because it's the consumers driving change.
Yeah.
So we are a company, we market to the consumer because they're the ones that engage with us. Yeah. And actually quite a lot of decision makers within business are our end consumer. So we are very sort of active on social media with our videos. We want to be that brand that makes packaging interesting, that people actually are asking questions about packaging because nobody's ever done it before, but actually let's talk about it. It can be a sort of a fundamental part of the brand and the brand experience, and really bringing it out to the forefront. So we are a consumer facing from a marketing point of view, but then we feed that into businesses. And what we're trying to say is, look, the consumers care. And we've seen, for example, with Clean Co, their Trustpilot reviews all mention packaging. Oh, the packaging is great. Oh, my grandkid loved the packaging and made it into a rhino. It was so fun. And seeing, sort of helping the brand see that the added value to not just going being like choosing a sustainable product, but the added value that the consumers care, that they are noticing it, that they are engaging with it. And I think that's where the B2B comes in, is just showing them the impact that they can make with better decisions. So that's what we do. But I think the other thing that Flexi-Hex succeed in is bringing people along our journey. People like success stories. So we bring them on the journey of, what we're up to, what our goals are, what we're winning at, what we're not winning at, and being really, really authentic in who we are as people and as a company as well. And I think that helps people engage with our story.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. I love that idea. You're focusing on the end consumer, recognizing the influence that they have and the potential to create more cut through communications that then influence your immediate customers. Edzard, you're obviously doing, from what we've been discussing tonight, really interesting things in terms of how you bring your brand to life and communicate the supply chain, which is traditionally not communicated in fashion. Any other kind of bits of inspiration and ideas from what you've been doing in shaping around how you bring people along the journey and affect that behavior change faster?
Don't be too serious. Is the kind of like, I think it's a bit like, I suppose, learn that lesson from when you used to get your Donald Trump news from, or at least I used to get it from kind of Stephen Colbert and The Daily Show and all these people. And you used to kind of digest information, but in a way that was at least entertaining, because if you spent all day watching BBC News or CNN, you would want to kind of kill yourself. But I think that was like a real lesson for me, where it's like that idea of kind of creating content that is entertaining. I think that's a real key to this. Like, make it engaging, don't make it too, to talk about down, just don't make it too serious. Is what we've really seen, is people kind of, they want to know, but they want to be entertained at the same time. And we're lucky in the sense that it's obviously a slightly ludicrous proposition that you adopt a sheep. So there's kind of a sense of absurdity kind of really mixed into our kind of like into our marketing story. But that is an important piece for us as well. It's just to kind of to make it to deliver a message, but to try and understand how to do that with a humorous tone, basically, in an entertaining manner.
We've just been sort of talking about that tone as well, it's about having a conversation with the consumer. It's like making it conversational so that they feel like they can be part of that, because otherwise, if you're not approachable, people get scared, and actually they just bury their heads back into the sand, because it's too much of a conversation. It's, people have stressful lives, and if you are then marketing them with things that are making them feel stressful, they're just going to run a mile. So it's about making it approachable and lightweight. I
totally agree. And at the end of the day, people are buying a garment from us, they're buying a sweater from us, so they don't necessarily also at that point, they want to be entertained, they don't want to be preached to at that moment in time.
And I think it comes back to that sort of humility theme, and that idea of sort of not pretending that you're perfect. If you're more human, if you're more approachable, that helps with not kind of looking like you're hoisting yourself on some kind of platform as a paragon of virtue. We're going to move to Q&As in just a second, but I think I'm going to be finished with one main question to you all, which is about collaboration. So one of the nice things about MarketingKind, and one of the sort of really useful things about MarketingKind, is how we all come together and we share discussions, knowledge, and challenge each other's thinking, and that's what we're all doing here tonight. And I'm really interested in your take, each of you, on the role of collaboration to help us move collectively further and faster. What does great collaboration look like to you? It could be with other brands, it could be with your customers, it could be with your supply chain, whoever it may be. What are your views on collaboration and how we address sustainability and go beyond it? And maybe we'll start with you, Kerry, because I think you've probably got a bit of a different take on that with the kind of work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, overall, I just truly don't believe sustainability efforts in any way can be achieved without partnerships and collaborations, whether that's in your sector or across. To echo what I said earlier, I think there's so much to learn across sectors and being able to collaborate. For me, what I see with the fashion industry is an industry that was once built on so much competition and the runway shows unveiling things and who's got what first and what's the latest latest trend and who got what model to wear it and the influencers and the celebrities. We're now moving into a much accelerated collaborative sector where people are starting to share, but we need to see more of it. The research, the resources, the work that where I sit is very B2B or government level, working with leaders and so forth. And we need to see collaboration happening amongst countries to drive unified policy that then can trickle down and be an example and inspire action across then those working in the sectors. But without collaboration, we are not getting anywhere, never mind anywhere soon.
Thank you very much. Any other takes on this idea of collaboration? Any from any of you from a different kind of angles doing what you do?
I definitely think I've kind of coming into this space. I used to work and consult with some small business founders, but then whenever I became one myself, I think just finding that kind of like your crew of other people, and they can be in different industries. I have one in skincare, you got one in coffee, one in fashion, and you are going through a lot of the shared issues. I mean, they're the same. We're all having logistics issues and where we're keeping the warehouse and our packaging maybe we were using a similar bag to what Sheep's included. It's like we can learn from those things. And whenever I find those conversations, I try to take weekly one-to-ones with different founders across different sectors and different sizes of businesses and just hear what they have to say. Like, what are they struggling with? What can I help them with? Even though we're much smaller, are there things we can recommend? And that is like such a positive part of my week. I always learn something new, and I'm always actually able to follow up and share great, oh, here's this warehouse that I just heard about for this, or here's this great packaging. I mean, I just had it come up today. Another brand in the drink space found an olive waste paper. And I was like, oh, this is what I've been looking for, this paper made out of olive waste. And he found it. And it's, that sort of exchange is really lovely. And we've been able to update a couple pieces of our packaging, like a little plastic seal that I just couldn't stand, but I couldn't afford the MOQs for anything other than that last year. And this year, because of another founder, introduced me to one that is a plant-based, like it's a compostable, comes off, made from corn. And I was like, this is what it's about. And you don't have enough hours in the day to constantly research all these different things. But if you share with each other and just get a little crew of like-minded businesses, again, they don't have to be competitive, or they can be. I talk to olive oil founders all the time, and I tell them everything I can because I want to lift up this industry and make it better. Compete with me. I don't care, as long as you're paying these farmers and build the business right.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's not a competition. Sustainability isn't a competition. Yeah. And we can only make a big impact when we're doing it together. And from the packaging point of view, we are a very small business. Now, we could have gone in and said we want to compete with some of these global packaging companies, or we can work with them and make a bigger impact. And to do that, we need to find solutions that make them profit and that make us profit, and that we can do good together. So it's about having authentic conversations, saying, okay, here's how we can help you. We have a solution in the packaging industry that will complement, one of your products that you sell, whether it's an out-of-box solution that we know works well with our sleeves. Let's collaborate. Let's give this to your customers. But it's about working with these people, because they've been in the packaging industry, for example, for years. They have the expertise that we might not have, that might complement our thoughts and our product. They have the databases, they have the customers. So how can we work with that in a way that benefits both of us as businesses, but most importantly makes a really big impact on minimizing, the impact that we have on our planet?
Brilliant. Thank you, Bella. Sustainability isn't a competition. That's so true. I just want to start to bring in some questions from the audience now. So there's a couple that relate to cost. A lot of people have been hurt financially by COVID. We've talked about how in your supply chain, in some instances, we've kind of brought forward stories about the importance of paying a living wage and sort of the human, I think you called it the human value chain, Kerry. But often the most sustainable choices are not the cheapest, unsurprisingly. And we have as one of our attendees has said, the climate emergency cannot be separated from the challenge of poverty. How can businesses address both problems and remain relevant to a dangerous warming world in which the cost of living is also rising? So that's not something that you can solve as organizations, as new businesses, but it's a question that come up earlier, actually, in some of the questions that were submitted in advance, which is around how can you, and I think it goes back to this point about collaboration and sustainability isn't a competition. How can you, as businesses, accelerate impact by reaching beyond your niche of consumers who at the moment may have this the deeper pockets to buy into this beautiful sweater or this wonderful bottle of olive oil that's significantly better than what's sitting on the supermarket shelf in your average bottle. How do we deal with this issue of poverty? And is there a way in which, as brands, you can have a point of view on that and do anything on that goes beyond the profit that you make? Difficult question. Does anyone
seeing we probably sell the most expensive item on this panel, it's probably one definitely for us to address. So I think in fashion, the real problem is this idea of value that has been totally upended. And fast fashion is obviously can provide stuff a lot cheaper, but at such a significant impact on the planet, right? And I think the real issue there is, first of all, the garments don't last as long. You tend to wear them a handful of times, therefore the kind of like price per wear is far less. It's just far higher if you actually work out something. I'm like obviously pointing my own products, but like a well-made sweater, we also offer like a for life guarantee, so you can send it back to us, we'll fix it. So actually on a kind of per wear basis, that gets it becomes less expensive in the long run. But I think also what it comes down to is there's a couple of things happening there. First of all, these businesses that are allowed to kind of continue to destroy the planet are going to like cost us a hell of a lot more in the long run. I mean, and that is going to come down to taxes at the end of it, right? It's going to go the amount of ecological damage that is going to happen, flooding, etc. All these bits and pieces that are going to start to damage our way of living. They're all going to have to be, there's going to have to be a financial bailout, and that is going to be significantly higher than the price that if we start to kind of slightly set a new line of pricing now. Mm-hmm. And I think the other big piece with this is also something else that came out, was talked about earlier, is legislation. It's like there has to be legislation that creates a fair market, right? Where you can offer stuff, and if you're making stuff positively, then you're not unfairly disadvantaged, right? You can create a £1 bikini at Boohoo, but the amount of damage that is happening there is simply no way that you are paying someone a fair living wage if you're selling a £1 bikini. There's no way that material is sustainably sourced. Like there is so much damage happening by purchasing that garment. And but they're not there's no disadvantage that those brands have. They live according to the same rules that we have to live by. And I think that's the big piece that needs to change, is there's a legislation piece. And then also, once again, as sustainable practices start to become more commonplace, as they start to be demanded of factories in general, and as they start to, it becomes more commonplace to behave sustainably, prices will go down. And we also know that actually some of the kind of like the more eco-friendly alternatives are also cheaper. And once again, once more investment happens into the space, and once some of these new materials have a higher amount of investment, again, prices will eventually go down.
Yeah. And I think this is where it comes back to a combination of transparency and bringing your story to life. That I think it's quite easy for a lot of brands these days, and I've seen so many in the fashion space, to say we're sustainable because we make our products well. And obviously that's not enough just to claim that your products are quality and they last long. There's no way that's enough, but it's what's so many now are latching onto. But there is a truth in that, as long as that's underpinned by, proper rigorous transparency along the supply chain, and then brought to life in a really engaging way. Because absolutely a well-made product that's made well for the planet can have a lower impact and can financially be better than something cheaper in the long run.
I think in the chat, somebody's saying how like the real value of food and how much that needs to cost. The same thing does happen in the food chain with, there's obviously subsidies on a lot of really bad food that are getting out there and things that aren't necessarily good for the world. And then there are, not support for things that could be providing a lot more nutrition. And I think whenever we look at things that can be fast food in a sense, not just fast food, but things that aren't made very well, it's just not paying its bills. It's not paying its bills whenever it comes to our health and nutrition. We're not getting full nutrition from that food. So we're over consuming a lot of stuff that's just not good for us. Even in the case of oils, you can use less extra virgin than you would on other oils, just the way the properties of how it's cooked. It's not paying it for like you were saying, the land damage and what's actually going to happen to the planet because of consuming things like that. And it's also, our long-term like general health and how many harvests we have left. All of those things are at stake whenever we continue to consume all of these products that are, I suppose, cheap. But also paying fair. If you understand the value and you're paying fair, this is a cycle. This is a circle, because us paying our farmers more raises their quality of living, and it enables them to pay their day laborers more, and everyone is lifted up by whenever you do that. So suddenly it's not a complete, like somebody at one end can't afford, because now they're being brought up because they're being paid fairly. So you have to kind of put it all in perspective whenever you're talking about cost and these, like, what is the true value? Well, it also is valuing them, enabling them to have a better lifestyle, which, God, I can only imagine in fashion what that discrepancy is like, because it's not nice in food.
No, and I think it's about then how you justify, is perhaps not the quite right word, but how you, again, it comes back to transparency, how you show why your product is the price it is, why it has the value it does, because of all the things that you're doing along the supply chain to justify that. And that has meaning and value for people, but often they don't, in a lot of brands, they just don't see it. And so they look at a brand that is sustainable in a way and has a premium price point, and they think that they're might think they're being fleeced, or this is kind of something for the niche, and that's not how it works, of course. We've got a question in the chat as well about in the Q&A about how you measure success. So we've talked about people, planet, and profit a few times. We've talked about the importance of the human value chain. How do you decide what success looks like for you as organizations? How do you deem that you're achieving whatever goals you set beyond hitting financial targets? Maybe Bella, for you, it sounds like it's work in progress for you. You're thinking about, as you said at the beginning, you're thinking about moving from a mindset of doing less bad to actively doing more good. How do you think you will measure what success looks like?
Yeah, it's a really hard question, and we've been talking about it all day in our leadership team strategy meetings of what success looks like to us as a business in 1 year's time, and in 5 years' time, and then in 10 years' time. We haven't got the answer. It's not an easy answer. For now, we're measuring success as a business on the amount of plastic that we've removed from the packaging industry, because that was what we started with. That was stripping plastic from the packaging industry, and we measure that in kilometers based on some sort of assumptions that we can confidently make. But that's not our own goal, because our own goal is beyond just removing plastic. It's actually about reducing the amount of paper that is used for packaging. And actually, essentially, paper is still using a resource. It's using trees, right? And so, yes, we work with a company to plant local trees and native trees again, but you're still using a resource. So how can we stay on the forefront of innovation to make sure that we are using the most sustainable material out there with our sort of packaging solutions? And I don't know how we measure that. We haven't decided that yet, but I think it's about having some sort of metric in your weekly and your monthly that is focused on the environment. Because when we were knocking down, okay, what are our KPIs? It's sales, it's marketing, it's people, it's operations. But what's your environmental, what's your impact metric that you can really safely get a pulse on a weekly, monthly, and annual basis that keeps that in focus? Because I think that in a business situation, when you're trying to be profitable, even if your core is sustainability, it's quite easy to forget it when you've got all the noise happening on a daily basis. So how do you keep that at the center of the conversation?
Brilliant, thank you.
I don't have the answer, but we are talking about it.
No, and there's no easy answer, is there? It's a kind of constant work in progress, as you say, and that goes back to something you were saying earlier on, Edzard, about you can never be satisfied you're doing enough in the context of how you view the climate situation, and you're constantly analysing. How do you deem what success looks like to you? How do you deem value beyond profit and growth and so on?
So again, it's a really complex question. I think the more the industry changes, to be totally honest, like the bigger changes you start to see happen throughout the industry, the more positive you start to view things. And I think that for us is, that for us is a barometer of change happening, right? And I think what has been very positive, I think over the last 2 years, last 3-4 years, is that how much that conversation has really accelerated. And it was quite interesting to see kind of like, obviously the Greta Thunberg effect has been huge on the general conversation around the climate crisis, but it's also interesting how fashion suddenly immediately got brought into the conversation, and suddenly that became a huge topic. And also if you look at how kind of the conversation has shifted very quickly from fashion is problematic, brands start to say that they're going to, for instance, become carbon neutral by 2030, 2035. Immediately people start to kind of go like, okay, hold on a second. They start to become skeptical about it. They start to, kind of greenwashing claims start to come out, etc. Like there's definitely a movement happening towards it needs to accelerate even further now, right? And I think that is the kind of positive piece of where we seem to be at, is that conversation is now picking up and picking up and picking up. And I think that's how we will judge how we'll see success, is not only how we operate in the industry, but that hopefully more brands not only start to do, for instance, also have carbon negative supply chains, but do stuff that's far more innovative than we're doing, and far even kind of more positively impactful on the planet. So I think we look at it kind of as an industry as a whole, right? Yeah. That for us is the barometer of change.
And your comment on carbon there, it's kind of like, I think a lot of companies out there are seeing their measure of success as being carbon neutral and measuring just their carbon, but it's a much bigger conversation than carbon. You've got to look at it, like you say, that big picture, that whole holistic point of view, and the people part of it, and
especially in fashion, the people part of it is huge, obviously.
And I think that people are really, really focused and lasered in at the moment on the carbon, and it is one part of a really big conversation, and I don't think that is the key metric there.
Yes, makes complete sense. And I think we had a question earlier on about in the chat about how becoming carbon zero, but I think we're talking beyond that, aren't we, as throughout the whole discussion. Interesting question from Paul. What's held you back most as entrepreneurs, and what's most helped you succeed on the flip side? Any sort of first thoughts on particular challenges that have held you back in making the kind of impact and progress you want to make, and anything that's particularly helped you to succeed? Sarah, what about you? Anything on that comes to mind?
I think some things that have held us back is really financial. We haven't done any seed or investment. Everything has just been through us to this point, and trying to build the business that way. So like I was saying, you have these minimum order quantities that you have to hit. They're expecting you to buy like 50,000 of something, and you're like, I just launched my business. I don't even have, I'm going to sell 1,000 bottles this quarter. I can't do something like this. So you have a lot of MOQs and things that you're up against that just make it financially impossible for you to operate and to make those right decisions. As I said, there's a couple little things that I changed this year over last year because I just couldn't do it last year. We didn't know that the volumes, what they would be. And now that we've had a year of a really successful business, lots of great retailers and things come on board, we've been able to forecast better and, kind of still take a go at it. So I think financial is one, but the thing that has been the best would be that collaboration, talking to other founders and getting shortcuts through their through their pains and their suffering, which is why I'm always key to say exactly everything that's messed us up in this short time, because it's really helpful to avoid the pitfalls. And so that collaboration is definitely the fastest way to avoid, even whenever you're held back by money. You can take some shortcuts or share things with other small businesses, which is also really great.
Brilliant, thank you. What about you, Kerry? Anything that's held you back, and anything that's particularly helped you to succeed?
I think I wouldn't say held back. I would say slowed down, and I would say people's ignorance and naivety that the issues of the world and what goes on does not affect them. And that people do not realize that when this work was being spoken about many, many, many years ago, that the damage had already begun. We now describe it as a crisis, but this didn't happen overnight. This was people's very poor decisions and mainly based on lack of education. And I would say what's helped me most to succeed is being relentless. I think that's part of the tick box of being an entrepreneur. You're slightly on the border of insanity, but get to channel it into something that can build and do something great. But I think most of all, to echo slightly what Sarah was saying, is finding your like-minded folks that you can drive hope with and aspire and inspire each other to take that action, and that understand the bigger vision of what you're trying to do, even if it's with really more small steps, and then celebrating each other's small wins, because all of these collective small wins will actually drive to humongous transformative change and action.
Brilliant, thank you. And then one last question. We've got sort of a few things that have popped up around greenwashing and around brands that are out there purpose washing and making false claims, competitors that are pushing high cost products for low quality. How do you deal with those sort of, let's call them bad actors in your competitive ecosystem? Do you just say they exist and we're going to show them a better way? Are there any ways that you try and counter some of that greenwashing, that purpose washing that goes on? Or do you just kind of stay true to what you're doing and stay on that path? Any thoughts on that from any of you?
I think the thing around greenwashing is that it shows that people are starting. The good thing about it is that people are now really starting to interrogate, become more aware, and are cynical, right?
Yeah,
quite right to be after so long have been, kind of having been kind of fed misinformation. So I think in that way it's very positive. We get greenwashing claims chucked against us the whole time, right? And I think that the big piece there is you need to have a really robust response, and it puts you on your toes. You need to therefore have you need to justify your behavior. You need to have, again, third party audits happening, so you can go, here's the research that was done, we did a full LCA analysis by third party, here's the report, go ahead and read it if you don't believe us. And I think that puts us kind of more on our toes, because again, we have to be able to rebut this stuff, and we have to understand how to how to respond, right? And if we can't respond, that means that we are guilty of greenwashing. So I think that's kind of, for me, it's in many ways a real positive. I think the way that you can counteract these bad actors when it comes to greenwashing is regulation. It's about regulation. It's like, don't let them get away with them. And there was talks of a while ago of having a greenwashing, kind of like a greenwashing fine, right? That they would implement. If you made claims, you'd be fined quite considerably. I think do it, but make the fines really, really high, and you make them so extraordinarily high that if people are just too terrified to do it. Yeah. And I think that's what has to happen. We need to move to that type of model, right? So that we just cut through the bullshit and just have people not be able to again make claims that they can't back up. Yeah. And then I think that stuff will start to disappear quickly.
Brilliant, thank you.
That's the green claim codes that just came in, isn't it? I mean, the green claim codes is there for a reason, to stop people from doing that. But I think it is about looking internally, and especially Sarah, you made a really good point earlier that your logistics or your supply chain have all this information, and the marketing team run off with another story, but actually, like what we're doing at the moment at Flexi-Hex is fact checking our own facts. So what facts do we regularly put out there? Well, we've grown really quickly and a lot of information has changed. So actually, let's fact check our own facts and share with people what we've come up with and where we've got this information from. And actually, if we found out something that we haven't got quite right, well, let's go and correct that. And it's just about looking internally and making sure, always checking, especially when you have changeover of people in the company. People assume things that are being said in the company in the past are right, but actually not to make assumptions, to always just be saying, challenging your team members, is this true? Have we checked this? Can we better this? And making sure that those messages are then told correctly.
Thank you, Bella. Now, I said earlier on that we always finish on time, but clearly not when I'm running things. So I could speak to all of you for a whole other hour and a half minimum, because there's a whole bunch of questions I wanted to ask you and questions in the chat that I wanted to put to you, but we've run out of time. So just to wrap up super quickly, thank you so much to all of you for coming tonight to talk with me. I've found it incredibly fascinating, jotted loads of notes, and there's been a lot of positive feedback in the chat and through the Q&A. I think everyone's found it really engaging, and hopefully we've all sort of sparked off each other as we've talked. And just a few super quick notes on what's coming up in MarketingKind. On February the 10th, we've got a gathering on charity partnerships with Joel Barnett. In our next exchange, we've got the rather bold question of, can we rescue humanity? Eek. And that's on February the 16th. That's with Ian Golden, the former Vice President of the World Bank, who's also a former advisor to Nelson Mandela and founder of the Oxford Martin School. And then our first in-person Coffee with a Cause will be on March the 4th with Global Generation at their Story Garden in King's Cross. And it'll also be on Zoom for anyone who can't be there in person. All the information on these is on marketingkind.org. So thank you again so much to our wonderful panelists, Sarah, Kerry, Bella and Edzard for joining us tonight. It's been absolutely brilliant to chat with you. Thank you for your time.